Logan Mercer locked his forearm across the new girl's throat and squeezed full force. No mercy, exactly the way he'd planned it. She tapped the mat. He didn't let go. She tapped again. He tightened his grip. "Say it," he whispered. "Say you don't belong here." The whole class watched. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. That was his fatal mistake, because what Logan never knew, what none of them knew, was that the quiet woman he had spent 3 weeks calling the wrong new girl had just returned from a classified SEAL combat mission in the Caribbean. And the moment his arm locked around her throat, her training took over. He had no idea what was coming. If this story already has your blood boiling, you are exactly where you need to be. Subscribe to our channel, hit that notification bell, and drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's get into it. She arrived on a Tuesday morning when the fog was still sitting low over the Carolina coast, rolling in off the Atlantic, the way it always did before the heat of the day burned it off. Nobody paid much attention to her. That was in many ways exactly the point. Avery Callahan stepped off the base transit shuttle with one duffel bag slung over her left shoulder and a manila folder tucked under her right arm. She was 31 years old, 5 feet 6 inches tall, and she wore no ribbons, no decorations, no trident, that gold pin worn by every Navy SEAL that announces to the world exactly who and what you are. She wore nothing that said anything about her at all. Her uniform was pressed but unremarkable. Her hair was regulation. Her face was calm in the way that people who have survived genuinely terrible things sometimes go calm, like a lake that has been through a storm and learned how to be still again. She signed in at the administrative desk, accepted her bunk assignment, and walked to Barracks C without asking anyone for directions. She already knew where it was. What Avery Callahan did not carry with her, at least not visibly, was any indication of what she had done 2 months earlier in the Caribbean Sea in the darkness before dawn, in a situation so classified that the paperwork describing it was kept in a vault that required 2 separate officers with 2 separate keys to open. She did not carry any sign that she had pulled 3 American civilian contractors out of a maritime hostage situation in which everything that could go wrong had gone wrong, and that she had brought all 3 of them home breathing. She carried a small notebook instead. Spiral-bound standard issue, the kind that costs less than $2 at any base supply shop. She had already written 2 things in it by the time she reached her bunk. The first thing she wrote was a name, Logan Mercer. She had read his file on the flight down from Virginia. She had read all of their files, every one of the 40 cadets currently enrolled in Advanced Reconnaissance Class 207, the joint training program running out of Camp Hawthorne on the North Carolina coast. She had read their fitness scores and their psych evaluations, their prior service records, and their instructor comments. She had read the 3 separate incident reports, all of them vague, all of them inconclusive, all of them written by people who were clearly afraid of something, describing unexplained injuries to junior cadets during overnight field training. Logan Mercer appeared in none of those reports by name. He didn't need to. Avery had been doing this long enough to recognize the shape of a person's influence, even when their fingerprints weren't on the weapon. The second thing she wrote was a question. How many of them already know what's happening and choose not to speak? She closed the notebook, slid it under her pillow, and went to find the dining hall. The first thing you noticed about Logan Mercer was his size. He was 6 feet 2, 220 pounds of division-worn wrestling muscle, and he moved through a room the way certain men do when they have been the biggest and strongest person in every room they have ever entered since the age of 14. He moved like the room belonged to him, like everyone else in it was a guest who had not quite been properly vetted. I was sitting at the long table nearest the window, the table where the reconnaissance candidates always sat, where they had always sat for the entire duration of Class 207, a tradition he had established in week 2 by simply sitting down there first and staring at anyone who tried to join without his permission. A was mid-sentence when Avery walked in, telling a story about a repelling incident from the previous week that had the cadets around him laughing in the careful way that people laugh when they're not entirely sure if it's safe not to. His friend and most devoted follower, Cadet Tate Holloway, was laughing loudest of all. Tate was the kind of person who would have been genuinely charming in a different context, in a life where he had not attached himself so completely to someone else's identity that he had nearly forgotten he possessed his own. Avery picked up a tray. She scanned the room. The only available seats were at Logan's table or at a smaller table near the back, where two cadets were sitting in the isolated, uncomfortable way of people who had learned that it was safer to eat alone. She walked toward Logan's table because she wanted to see what he would do. She found out in about 45 seconds. I didn't wait for her to sit down. He just looked at her, then looked at the men around him and said loud enough for half the dining hall to hear it. "You're lost, sweetheart. Communications office is on the other side of the base." Nobody laughed at that one. The silence was its own kind of answer. Avery set her tray down. "I'm in class 207, she said, "communications track." Logan looked at her the way you might look at a piece of equipment that had been delivered to the wrong address. Mildly inconvenienced. Already bored. "Right," he said. "And you think the comm girls eat with the recon candidates because there's a seat available," Avery said. Logan leaned back in his chair. He had a way of doing that, leaning back, arms crossed, jaw set, that communicated an entire paragraph of contempt without a single additional word. He was fluent in that particular body language. He had been speaking it since high school. "Here's what's going to happen," he said. He wasn't angry. He was almost pleasant about it, which was in its own way more chilling than anger would have been. "You're going to take your tray over to that table by the door, and you're going to sit there, and you're going to stay out of the way of people who are actually going to do something with their careers. How does that sound?" The room was watching now. 20-something cadets with forks halfway to their mouths, waiting to see what she would do. Avery looked at Logan Mercer for exactly 3 seconds. Then she picked up her tray and walked to the table by the door. She heard someone at Logan's table exhale. She heard Tate Holloway say under his breath, "New office girl," and heard the laughter that followed. It controlled and mean and relieved in the way that laughter is when the person doing the laughing is grateful. They are not the one being laughed at. She sat down at the small table. She ate her food. She did not look at Logan's table again. But beneath her tray, tucked under her right leg, was her notebook. And by the time she was finished eating, she had added 3 more lines of notes. Public humiliation as control tactic. Uses office girl to establish class hierarchy. Others comply through laughter. Nobody objected. And then at the bottom, she added 1 more name. Cadet Noah Bennett, present. Did not laugh, did not object either. She underlined it and put the notebook away. Noah Bennett was 24 years old and wanted more than almost anything else in the world to be a good person. The problem was that he was currently discovering that wanting to be good and actually being good were 2 very different skills, and that the second one required something he was still trying to find. He had watched the whole thing with Logan in the dining hall. He had watched it and felt his stomach go tight and his jaw clench, and he had thought very clearly that someone should say something, and then he had sat there and said nothing, and the moment had passed and he had gone back to his food. He told himself it wasn't his business. He told himself that she hadn't seemed upset, so maybe it wasn't as bad as it looked. He told himself a lot of things over the next few hours, and none of them made him feel any better. He noticed her again in the equipment bay that evening, checking over her navigation kit before the following day's field exercise. She was methodical about it, patient. She examined each item like she was reintroducing herself to old friends, which he found strange for someone who was supposedly just a communications tech doing routine training. He almost said something to her. He almost said, "Hey, I'm sorry about earlier, I should have spoken up." But he didn't, because that would have required explaining why he hadn't, and he wasn't ready to have that conversation with a stranger. Or if he was honest with himself with anyone. He went to bed instead. Avery 3, bunks down in the adjacent section, heard him leave. She lay on her back in the dark and stared at the ceiling and thought about Noah Bennett in his very loud, very pointed silence. She had seen that silence before. She had seen it in units and programs and training pipelines across every branch of the military, and it always meant the same thing. It meant that the culture had already spread far enough that even the decent people had been infected by it. They didn't approve of what was happening. They weren't participating in the worst of it, but they were protecting themselves, which in practice amounted to exactly the same thing as protecting the person doing the harm. She thought about her orders. Remain anonymous. Observe, report. She thought about the 3 incident reports in Logan Mercer's file that hadn't named him. She thought about the junior cadet she had seen that afternoon with a bruise along his left forearm that was the exact shape and size of a grip and twist injury, the kind that happened when someone grabbed you hard enough that their fingers left marks. She thought about all of it in the dark, and then she closed her eyes and went to sleep because she had a navigation exercise in the morning and she needed to be sharp. The navigation exercise started at 0500 and covered 11 miles of coastal terrain that included salt marshes, ridge lines, dense pine scrub, and 2 river crossings. Each cadet was issued a map, a compass, a radio, and a waterproof kit. They had 6 hours. Avery found her kit short 2 items before she had walked 100 yards from the start point. The waterproof compass housing was cracked, which would render it unreliable in anything deeper than ankle water, and the inner pouch of her navigation pack was missing its spare batteries, which meant her backup radio would run dead after 4 hours instead of 8. She stopped walking. She stood there for a moment. She thought about the timing the equipment bay had been accessible to anyone in the class until 0430 that morning, and she thought about who had known she would be using this particular kit. Then she pulled out her primary compass, which she had checked and packed herself the night before, and she started walking. She compensated for their cracked housing by checking elevation against her map every quarter mile and using the sun angle as a secondary reference. It took her an extra 11 minutes over the first 3 miles, which put her slightly behind the pace she needed to maintain, but she adjusted. She always adjusted. She was crossing the second river knee-deep, moving fast, the bottom soft with silt, when she heard someone struggling behind her and to the left. She turned. Noah Bennett was wading in at the wrong angle, pointed directly toward a section of the channel that looked passable, but was betraying itself with a subtle dark pull at the surface, the kind of current that didn't advertise itself until it had your legs and was not inclined to give them back. Avery changed her angle and moved toward him. She didn't call out. She just planted her feet in the riverbed and reached back and tapped his arm. And when he looked at her, she pointed 2 fingers toward the dark water he was heading for and then drew those same fingers down in a slow, deliberate motion that meant no don't, and then pointed to where she was standing. He looked at the water. He looked at her. He looked at the water again. Then he adjusted his angle and waded over to her position and crossed with her. On the far bank, breathing hard, he looked at her. "That bad," he said. "Bad enough," she said. "You'd have made it probably halfway before it got your feet. After that, it depends on how fast you swim and how much gear you're willing to let go." He was quiet for a moment. "How'd you see it?" She pointed at the surface of the water 20 yards downstream, where the current was pushing against a half-submerged log in a way that showed its true speed. "Current always tells you where it's going," she said. "You just have to know what to look for." He nodded slowly. He had the look of someone filing information away. She appreciated that about him. Some people hear and forget. Some people hear and remember. Noah Bennett looked like the second kind. "I'm Noah," he said. "Bennett, I'm a corpsman." "I know," she said. He looked at her. "How do you know that?" She was already walking. "You checked your kit 3 times before we started," she said. "You check things when you're worried about people. That's a corpsman habit." He jogged a few steps to keep up with her. He seemed to want to say something else. She gave him the silence to figure out whether he was going to say it. He didn't. Not yet. But he finished the navigation course 11 minutes ahead of his expected pace, and he did it without getting lost once because he paid attention to every waterway they crossed after that and looked for the current before he entered. Avery made note of that too. The rumors started on day 3. She had expected them sooner, honestly. Logan Mercer was not a patient man when it came to puzzles he couldn't solve, and Avery was increasingly presenting as a puzzle. She completed every exercise. She didn't complain. She didn't ask for help. She helped other people without making a production of it. And she showed no visible reaction to any of the things he did to her, which was, from Logan's perspective, deeply personally offensive. The rumors were the next tool in the kit. She heard the first one in the women's head at 0600, 2 cadets talking across shower stalls, not aware she was at the sink. "Special treatment," one of them said. "She didn't earn her spot here. Someone made a call. He said she flunked the entry assessment, and they passed her anyway." She dried her hands and walked out and noted the date and time in her notebook. The second rumor she heard directly from a young cadet named Portillo, who had the flushed, uncomfortable look of someone who had just been instructed to deliver a message he didn't entirely believe. Portillo told her, staring somewhere slightly to the left of her face, that he'd heard from a reliable source that her placement in Class 207 was administrative, not merit-based, and that it wouldn't be fair to the actual recon candidates if she was graded on the same scale. Avery thanked him. She meant it. She could tell he was not enjoying himself. You don't have to deliver those for him, she said quietly. You know that, right? Portillo went very still. I don't know what you mean. Yes, you do, she said. Not unkindly, just true. He left fast. She went to her morning brief and said nothing about the conversation. The equipment sabotage, she noted. The rumors, she noted. The particular way Logan Mercer watched her in formation. Not with hostility, but with the calculating patience of someone running an experiment. She noted that too. She was constructing something line by line in that spiral notebook, and what she was constructing was not a revenge plan or a complaint. It was a portrait, complete, accurate, and devastating in its detail. Logan Mercer was not a monster. That was important to understand. Monsters were easy. They announced themselves. What Logan was more ordinary than that and more dangerous because he was a person with real gifts, physical discipline, tactical instinct, a genuine ability to inspire people when he chose to, who had never been told that the fear he created in other people was not the same as the respect he believed he'd earned. Nobody had ever made him feel the cost of it, so he had never stopped paying it. Avery intended to change that, but she was going to do it on her terms in her time with a level of precision that left no room for him to dismiss what happened as emotional, personal, or unfair. She was patient. She had learned patience in places that made Camp Hawthorne look like a retreat. On day 5, Logan switched tactics again. This time he targeted her publicly in the after-action debrief for a combined planning exercise in which Class 207 had divided into 2 teams and run simultaneous simulated reconnaissance scenarios. Avery had been on Team Bravo assigned to the communications support role she was nominally there to fill, and she had done the job efficiently, routing field communications, maintaining the log flagging 2 timing errors in the scenario that would have compromised Team Alpha's extract. In the debrief, Logan raised his hand and said with the practiced reasonableness of someone who had run this particular play before, I just want to flag something for the instructors. Team Bravo's comm support made judgment calls on the timeline that weren't sanctioned by the team leader. In a real op, that creates a liability. The room was quiet. Instructor Reyes, running the debrief, looked up from his notes. What's the nature of the concern, Mercer? She adjusted the extract timing without authorization, Logan said. 15 minutes on 2 elements. I'm not saying she was wrong necessarily. I'm saying that's the kind of unilateral decision that gets people killed downrange when the person making it doesn't have the experience to back it up. He said it looking directly at Avery. It was extraordinarily well done. It was framed as professional concern. It was framed as safety. It was, in fact, a public challenge designed to make her either defend herself, which would make her look defensive and therefore guilty, or stay silent, which would make her look like she knew she had done something wrong. Instructor Reyes looked at Avery. Callahan, walk us through the timing adjustment. Avery stood. She did not look at Logan. She looked at Reyes. Team Alpha's original extract was timed to a checkpoint that depended on a tidal window, she said. The tidal data in the scenario package was pulled from a chart dated 11 weeks ago. Based on the current lunar cycle, that window would have been 9 minutes shorter than the chart indicated. The 15-minute adjustment gave both elements a 4-minute buffer on either side of the corrected window. I flagged the discrepancy in the comms log. Silence. Reyes looked at the scenario package on the table in front of him. He flipped to the title data page. He checked it against the date. His expression did not change, but something behind his eyes shifted. That's accurate, he said. The chart was outdated. Good catch. He made a note. Mercer, any follow-up? Logan said nothing for 3 full seconds. No, but he said, no, I think that covers it. He looked at her as he sat back down, and for the first time, Avery saw something new in his face. Not anger, not contempt, fear. Not of her, not yet. Fear of the gap. She was revealing the space between what he believed he knew and what she actually knew, and how wide that gap was turning out to be. She sat down and wrote one more note in her notebook. He's starting to understand. She did not write that it would make him more dangerous before it made him less. But she knew it. She had seen it before. People like Logan Mercer, when they began to feel uncertain, did not respond by stepping back and reassessing. They escalated. She closed the notebook and waited for whatever was coming next. It came on day 7. The close quarters combat class was held in the base gymnasium, a large open space with padded mats laid out across the center an observation space on 3 sides where other cadets could watch. Commander Rebecca Sloan was running it personally, which should have been enough by itself to ensure that everything that happened in that room stayed within the rules. Should have been. Commander Sloan was the only person on that base besides Avery herself who knew the truth about why Avery was there. She was 44 years old, a 22-year naval officer, and she ran Camp Hawthorne with the kind of even-handed authority that came from having earned it the hard, long way. She had her suspicions about what was happening in Class 207. She had read the same 3 incident reports that Avery had read. She had also spoken to 2 separate junior cadets who had refused to go on record. She had been waiting for something she could act on. The CQC class began with a drill that everyone in the program knew: choke escape techniques run in controlled pairs with one simple and absolute rule. You apply controlled pressure only, moderate resistance, training contact. The moment your partner taps you, release immediately. The moment they tap you, release immediately. She said it twice. She said it, looking at the whole room, and then she said it again, looking at no one in particular. And every person in that gymnasium understood what she was saying and why. Logan Mercer heard every word. He also volunteered to manage the pairing assignments. It was such a natural thing to do, so consistent with his role as the class's dominant personality, that Reyes let him do it without question. Logan moved through the room with a clipboard calling names, pointing to positions, and by the time he was done, the pairings were arranged and he was standing in front of Avery. "Looks like you're with me," he said. She looked at him. His face was open, almost friendly. That was the tell. Logan Mercer was not genuinely friendly. When his face went open like that, it meant he had already decided how the next few minutes were going to go. "Let's go," she said. They took their positions on the center mat. Commander Sloan's voice ran through the drill sequence. First rotation was the standing choke from behind. One partner played the attacker, one played the defender. After the tap, you switched. Logan moved behind her. She felt him set his feet. "Control pressure only," Commander Sloan said from across the room. "Attackers, remember, this is a training environment. We are developing technique, not winning anything." Logan's arm came across her throat. It was not training pressure. It was not moderate resistance. It was the full force of 220 pounds of muscle applied with deliberate, controlled intention. The kind of grip that knew exactly what it was doing, and Avery felt it immediately, felt the compression on her airway, felt the reduction in blood flow to her brain, felt the whole familiar architecture of a genuine threat. She tapped the mat. His arm tightened. She tapped again, clearly, twice hard. "Mercer," Commander Sloan's voice from across the room, sharp and immediate. "Release." He did not release. The room had gone completely silent. She could feel it, even in her current position, the quality of the silence changing every person in that gymnasium, suddenly understanding that something had shifted from training into something else entirely. Logan's mouth was near her ear. His voice was so quiet that only she could hear it. "Say it," he said. "Tell me you don't belong here. Tell me you've been faking it this whole time." She tapped again. Loud, flat, unmistakable. Mercer, Commander Sloan was moving across the mats now. Avery could hear the footsteps. "I said release. That is a direct order." His arm did not move. And in that moment, in that exact specific moment, Avery Callahan stopped being the quiet transfer who sat at the table by the door and ate her food without making eye contact. She didn't decide to stop. Her body made the decision before her conscious mind finished forming the thought, the way it does after enough years and enough training, when the threat crosses a threshold that the nervous system recognizes before the brain can articulate it. She did not explode. She did not rage. She did not try to prove anything to anyone watching. What she did was precise. What she did was fast. What she did was the product of thousands of hours of training in environments that made this gymnasium look like a comfortable living room. She protected her airway first, a technique so specific and economical that it barely looked like movement at all, just a micro adjustment in her chin and shoulder that shifted the compression angle and bought her a sliver of breath. Then she found his grip, identified the weakest point in his leverage, and attacked it with the edge of her left hand in a motion that was less than 4 inches long and absolutely devastating to the joint structure holding his arm in place. His grip loosened. She moved. It took less than 2 seconds. It was the kind of 2 seconds that people who were in that room would be describing for years afterward. because it had the quality of something that you have to see multiple times before your brain accepts that it actually happened the way it appeared to happen. Logan Mercer was on the mat. I was on his stomach, face turned sideways, his right arm locked behind him in a restraint that she was maintaining with exactly enough pressure to communicate that any movement on his part would be a decision he would regret, and she was not touching him with anything except the two hands holding that restraint, and she was barely breathing hard. The room did not make a sound. Commander Sloan reached them. She stopped 2 feet away. She looked at the situation in front of her with the expression of a person who is doing rapid, complicated calculations behind a professionally neutral face. "Callahan," she said. "Release." Avery released immediately. She stood up and stepped back. Her hands came to her sides. Logan lay on the mat for a moment. Then he pushed himself up. His face had gone through several colors in rapid succession and was currently settling on something that was trying to be dignity, but kept sliding towards shock. "She attacked me," he said. He looked at Commander Sloan. His voice had a raw edge to it, something unfamiliar. The voice of a person who had just touched a fence he hadn't known was electric. "I want it on record that she attacked me without cause." Commander Sloan looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at the room. "Who else was here?" she said, and the room was very quiet. And then Noah Bennett raised his hand. He raised it slowly. He kept it up. He looked at Commander Sloan and not at Logan, and he said in a voice that was slightly unsteady but completely clear, "He didn't release on the tap. She tapped multiple times. You gave a direct order twice. He didn't release on either one." The silence that followed was different from all the previous silences. 2 more hands went up, Cadets Portillo and Diaz. Neither of them looking at Logan, both of them looking somewhere just past Commander Sloan's shoulder with the expression of people who have just stepped off a ledge they've been standing on for a very long time and are learning whether the ground below is as hard as they feared. "He's right," Portillo said. "She tapped." He ignored it. 3 times, Diaz said. "At least 3 times before it ended." Logan looked at them with a particular quality of expression that Avery recognized that she had noted carefully in her file on him, because it was the expression of a person who has built his entire structure of power on the assumption that certain people will always remain silent. "You're done for today, Mercer," Commander Sloan said. She didn't raise her voice. She never needed to. "Go to medical for evaluation. Then report to my office at 1400. Logan left. The room exhaled. And Avery stood in the center of the mat with her hands at her sides, looking completely ordinary. Like she had simply done what needed to be done and was now ready for whatever came next. And she thought about Noah Bennett's raised hand, and she thought about how courage sometimes looks like a very small and unsteady gesture that changes everything anyway. She went back to her bunk that evening and opened her notebook. She did not write Logan's name again. She wrote Noah's instead. "He found it," she wrote. "Under the fear, there's something solid. That's what this program should be selecting for." She closed the notebook. Outside, the Carolina evening was moving in off the water. And somewhere on the other side of the base, Logan Mercer was sitting in a medical bay with a corpsman examining his shoulder, trying to understand how the wrong new girl had just put him on the floor in front of everyone he had spent 6 weeks teaching to fear him. He did not understand it yet. But he was about to have a great deal of time to think about it. And what he didn't know, what none of them knew, not even Noah with his raised hand and his small act of courage, was that the story wasn't close to being over. It was barely even started. Logan Mercer sat in the medical bay for 47 minutes before anyone from his unit came to check on him. That by itself told him something he wasn't ready to hear. The corpsman on duty, not Noah, someone else, a quiet specialist named Graves who kept his opinions behind his teeth, had cleared him physically. Shoulder was intact, no joint damage. Avery had applied the restraint with surgical precision, enough to hold and control, not enough to injure. Graves had written that on the evaluation form, in the same tone he might use to note that a patient's blood pressure was normal, and Logan had wanted to tear the form in half and couldn't explain exactly why. He sat on the paper-covered examination table in the empty bay and stared at the wall and tried to organize what had happened into a shape he could tolerate. The problem was that every shape he tried kept coming back to the same center. She had put him on the floor, in front of 40-something cadets and a commanding officer. A woman 40 pounds lighter and 6 inches shorter than him had taken his best choke and turned it into a restraint in under 2 seconds, and she had done it without losing her composure, without saying a single word to him afterward, and without appearing to feel anything about it beyond mild professional necessity. That last part was the one that kept getting stuck. He had expected anger from her. He had expected fear first, and then anger, and maybe tears, because that was the script he had run before on people he had decided needed to understand their place, and it had always worked. Not because he was cruel, he would have told you, because he was honest. Because someone had to maintain standards. Because the weak ones needed to understand early that the real world was not going to accommodate their feelings. He had told himself that story so many times it had become invisible to him, the way wallpaper becomes invisible after you've lived with it long enough. Avery hadn't given him anger or tears. She had given him a restraint, and then she had stood up and put her hands at her sides and waited for Commander Sloan's next instruction. And the specific, unacceptable thing, was that in that moment, standing up on the mat with her hands at her sides, she had looked more like a military professional than Logan had ever looked in his life, and he knew it, and she hadn't said a word about it. He was still sitting there when Tate came in. Tate Holloway knocked on the frame of the open door with his knuckles, 2 quick taps, the same signal they'd been using since OCS to mean I'm coming in and I'm alone. He crossed the room and sat in the plastic chair against the wall and looked at Logan with an expression that was trying to be sympathy and landing somewhere between that and confused. "You good," Tate said. "Fine," Logan said. "Shoulder cleared." Tate nodded. He was quiet for a moment. "Bennett talked," he said, "and Portillo, Diaz." Logan said nothing. "I just thought you should know. All 3 of them backed her version. Sloan's got witness statements." "I know," Logan said. "Portillo." Tate shook his head slightly, something small and tight in his jaw. "He was with us on the Weston thing. He knew the rules when he signed on." "Don't talk about Weston in here," Logan said. Tate stopped, looked at the door, looked back. "Nobody's in the hall." "I said don't." Another silence. Different quality this time. The kind that happens when 2 people who have been close enough to share a shorthand start to suspect that the shorthand has been encoding something they haven't examined carefully enough. "Sloan wants you at 1400, Tate said finally. "I know. You want me to?" "No," Logan said. "Go back to the unit. Don't do anything. Don't talk to anyone. Just wait." Tate stood. He paused at the door. There was something he wanted to say. Logan could see it, the way you can see words behind someone's eyes when they're deciding whether the risk of saying them is worth what comes after. "What?" Logan said. "Nothing," Tate said. 1400. And he was gone. Logan sat alone in the medical bay and thought about Weston and about the 3 injury reports that had been filed and resolved and filed again without ever going anywhere, and he felt for the first time in a long time something that was not anger or contempt or confidence, something quieter, something that lived in the lower registers of the chest and had no clean name. He put it away before it could get a foothold. He was good at that. He had been good at that for a very long time. Commander Sloan's office smelled like black coffee and old paper, which was oddly comforting given the nature of the conversation she was about to have. She was behind her desk when Logan knocked at precisely 1400, not a minute late, because whatever else Logan Mercer was, he understood that being late to this particular meeting would be its own admission. He came in. He sat in the chair she indicated. He kept his back straight and his hands on his knees and his face in the neutral, attentive posture of a cadet in a disciplinary meeting who has decided to project professionalism regardless of what he's feeling. Sloan let him sit like that for 10 seconds without saying anything. "Tell me what happened," she said. "I applied the drill contact," Logan said. "She overreacted to the pressure level and escalated to a joint lock. I believe there was a miscommunication about..." "Logan." Her voice was quiet, not sharp, just final. "I was in the room." He stopped. "I gave you a direct order twice," she said. "I watched you not follow it. I watched her tap 3 times. I watched all of it. So let me ask you again, and I want you to think about your answer very carefully because the accuracy of what you say in this room in the next 60 seconds is going to matter for the rest of your career. Tell me what happened." The silence lasted 9 seconds. Avery, who was not in the office but had been in enough of them to know how they ran, could have predicted the next part. Logan's composure didn't crack. It adjusted. There is a difference. A crack is involuntary. An adjustment is a choice, and Logan Mercer, whatever his failures, was extremely disciplined about his choices. I exceeded the training parameters, he said. I applied more pressure than the drill called for. I did not release on the tap or on your first order. A pause. I should have released on the tap. Sloan looked at him for a long moment. And the second order, I should have released on your first order, he said again. She noted it. He had not answered the question directly. She also noted that he had not answered the why question, the one she hadn't asked yet, but was the only one that actually mattered. You're suspended from training effective immediately, she said. I'm opening a formal review. You will have the opportunity to provide a written statement, which I recommend you take seriously. In the meantime, you are restricted to barracks except for meals and mandatory base activities. Any contact with Cadet Callahan is prohibited. Any contact with witnesses who gave statements today is prohibited. She paused. Do you understand everything I've said? Yes, ma'am. Do you have questions? He looked at her. Is she being reviewed as well? Sloan held his gaze. For what? For the joint lock. She responded to a sustained, repeated safety violation with a controlled release technique, Sloan said. After tapping multiple times, after receiving no response, she released the instant I gave the command. Another pause equally weighted, which is the difference between what she did and what you did, Logan. I want you to sit with that. He stood. He thanked her. He walked out. And Sloan sat at her desk for a moment with her hands flat on the surface and her eyes on the middle distance, thinking about what she needed to do next and how quickly she needed to do it. Because Logan Mercer in a suspension was a controlled problem, but whatever he had been doing in that program for the past several weeks was a much less controlled one. She picked up her phone and texted one number. The message was 5 words. We need to talk tonight across the base in the equipment bay. Avery felt her phone vibrate once against her thigh. She glanced at the screen. Read the message. Put the phone back. She went back to helping Cadet Portillo remap his compass calibration, explaining the technique with the patient specificity of someone who had done it in places and conditions that Portillo couldn't imagine, and who was choosing very deliberately not to mention that. Portillo was a fast learner. He had also, Avery had noticed in the past 20 minutes, started to breathe differently around her, less tightly, like something in him was recalibrating the threat assessment. You've done this before, Portillo said. Not a question. Done what before, she said. He gestured vaguely at the compass, at the equipment bay, at everything. All of it, he said. You're not what he said you were. She looked at him. What did he say I was? Portillo looked uncomfortable. He said the program took you as a quota that you didn't test in. And you believed him. A longer pause. For a while, he said, he's Logan's convincing. He's always been convincing. I know, she said. That's part of what makes him dangerous. Portillo was quiet. Then quietly, he told me to tell you that thing about the testing, about special treatment. I know that too. He looked at her. How are you not angry at me? She considered the question with the same care she applied to everything. I am a little angry at you, she said, but you raised your hand today. That cost you something. She handed him the compass. We're square. He turned the compass over in his hands. She watched him trying to decide whether he deserved that. She thought that the process of deciding was probably more valuable than whatever conclusion he reached. The meeting with Commander Sloan happened in the base commander's private conference room at 2200, after the base had gone to its evening quiet and the halls outside were empty. Avery sat across from Sloan with a cup of bad coffee between her hands and laid out everything in the notebook. 16 days of documentation, dates, times, observations, and names. Sloan read through it without interrupting. When she finished, she set it on the table between them and was quiet for a moment. Weston, she said. You flagged Weston 3 times. Junior cadet, Avery said. Forearm bruising consistent with a grip and twist. He filed a report saying he fell during PT. The report was accepted. I accepted it, Sloan said. I know. Because he wouldn't change his statement. I know, Avery said. And I'm not here to second-guess your call on the information you had. I'm here to tell you that the information you had was not complete. She looked at Sloan directly. This has been running for longer than 16 days. The culture in that class, the silence, the compliance, the way the cadets who should be speaking aren't speaking, that doesn't develop in 3 weeks. That's months of work. Sloan was quiet again, When she spoke, her voice had something in it that was not quite guilt and not quite self-recrimination, but lived in the neighborhood of both. I saw the warning signs, she said. Yes, Avery said. She did not offer anything softer than that, but she did not offer anything harder either. The question now is what we do with what we know. The exercise starts in 8 days, Sloan said. I know. If I pull Class 207 for a full investigation, lose the multinational timeline, that affects 3 other programs. It affects people who've done nothing wrong. I know, Avery said, which is why I'm not recommending you pull the class. Sloan looked at her. Then what are you recommending? Let it run, Avery said. Logan's suspended. Without him anchoring the culture, it's going to shift. Some of these cadets have been waiting for permission to be different. Give them the exercise, give them the conditions, and watch who they become without him in the room. Sloan thought about it for a long time. And if it goes wrong, she said, then we pull everyone and deal with the consequences, Avery said. But I don't think it goes wrong. I think most of these cadets are decent people who got caught in a current they didn't know how to fight. Sloan looked at her. Something moved across her face, a complicated thing. You sound like you've thought about this for a while. I thought about it crossing a river on day 6, Avery said. A current always tells you where it's going. You just have to know what to look for. Sloan almost smiled. Not quite, but almost. 1400 tomorrow, she said. Brief to the full instructor staff. I want your notebook on the record. Avery nodded. She walked back to barracks, in the dark and quiet, and lay on her bunk and stared at the ceiling and thought about Logan Mercer sitting in the medical bay and about Noah Bennett's hand going up and about Portillo saying, "How are you not angry at me?" And she thought about the fact that none of these people were finished yet. Not Logan, not Tate, not Noah, not Portillo. None of them were the people they were going to be. That was both the hardest thing and the only thing that made the work worth doing. Day 9 without Logan in the room was a measurably different experience for Class 207, and not in the way that several cadets had privately expected. They had expected relief. They got something more complicated. Without Logan as the organizing gravity of the class, the social structure did not simply relax into something healthier. It developed fractures. Tate tried to fill the space and couldn't, partly because Logan's authority had always been personal and physical, and Tate's natural register was follower, not leader, and partly because at least 6 cadets who had been loyal to Logan out of expedience rather than genuine respect immediately began recalculating their positions. The recalculation was visible. It looked like small, awkward conversational adjustments in the dining hall. It looked like cadets who had avoided certain tables suddenly sitting in different places. It looked like Portillo eating lunch with Noah Bennett for the first time in the course's history, and the two of them talking with the specific, slightly too formal energy of people who would like to be friends, but are not yet sure if they're allowed. Avery watched all of it from a position that was no longer quite as invisible as it had been in the first week. They knew she was something different now. They didn't know exactly what, but the gymnasium had made it impossible for anyone in Class 207 to look at her and see only a communications transfer. She had answered Logan's force with controlled precision, and she had done it without losing herself in the process. And that combination, the capability combined with the discipline, had changed the temperature of the room around her. Some cadets started approaching her differently, more directly, less performative. A cadet named Kim, who had barely spoken to Avery before, sat across from her in the planning room on day 9 and said without preamble, "Can you show me the title current thing? Noah said you can read it in the surface." "I can show you," Avery said. "Now." "Sure." They went to the waterway behind the training field, and she walked Kim through it from the beginning, not just the technique, but the underlying principle, the fact that water always shows you where the force is going, if you're willing to look at it honestly rather than looking at where you want to go. Kim was quick. She absorbed it in one pass and then asked 3 follow-up questions that were progressively more sophisticated. And by the end of the session, she had the foundation of something she'd be able to build on. Walking back, Kim said without looking at her, "He told us you were a quota." "I know," Avery said. "Did that make you angry?" "Yes," Avery said, simply, without elaboration. Kim seemed to find this more satisfying than a denial would have been. "What did you do with it?" Avery thought about the notebook, about 16 days of careful, precise documentation, about the decision to respond to every provocation with competence, instead of emotion. I used it, she said. Kim looked at her sideways. That's very cold-blooded. Or very disciplined, Avery said. Depends on how you look at it. Kim thought about that for the rest of the walk back and probably for some time afterward because Avery caught her with that particular inward look several times over the following 2 days, the look of someone running a conversation through their mind from different angles. On day 11, Tate made his first real mistake without Logan there to absorb the consequences. It happened in the tactical planning session for the upcoming coastal exercise, the 48-hour rescue simulation that would serve as the final evaluation for Class 207. Instructor Reyes had divided the class into 2 elements and given each element responsibility for planning one phase of the operation. Tate was leading element 2, and he had been doing it with the careful, effortful performance of someone who is very aware that they are being evaluated and very unsure whether what they are showing is actually what is being looked for. The problem was the weather data. The coastal exercise was scheduled across a 48-hour window that overlapped with a tropical weather system tracking up from the Bahamas. The system was moving faster than originally projected, and the updated meteorological brief from that morning, which all element leaders were required to read and incorporate into their planning, showed a 12-hour compression on the usable weather window. Avery had read the brief at 0600. She had noted the updated timing and adjusted her element's communication relay plan to account for it. She had flagged the change to Instructor Reyes. At 1100 in the planning session, she noticed that Tate's element had not incorporated the update. Their route and timing were based on the original weather window, which was now effectively obsolete. The route they had planned for their assault element moved through a section of coastal marshland that would, under the updated conditions, begin flooding 6 hours earlier than their plan assumed. She looked at the planning board. She looked at the timeline they had drawn. She looked at Tate. I was presenting to Reyes with the careful, aggressive confidence of someone who is terrified of looking uncertain. He was using Logan's register, the forward posture, the statements instead of questions, the assertion of authority as a substitute for its actual presence. And it was landing flat because Tate did not have Logan's physical certainty, and the performance without that underlying foundation had the quality of a borrowed suit. Avery raised her hand. Tate stopped, looked at her. Something moved across his face that was not quite hostility and not quite fear, but had elements of both. The updated weather brief changes your third phase timing, she said. She said it to Reyes, not to Tate, not a personal challenge, a planning observation. The marsh section on Element 2's route floods 6 hours earlier under the revised track. Their extract window closes before their assault phase begins. The room was quiet. Reyes looked at Tate. Did you incorporate the morning brief? A pause that was 2 seconds too long. We based our plan on the parameters in the original exercise packet, Tate said. The morning brief supersedes the original packet in the case of environmental updates, Reyes said. That's standing policy, Holloway. It's in the course manual. Another pause. Yes, sir. Your route needs revision, Reyes made a note. You've got until 1400 to resubmit. Tate nodded. He did not look at Avery. His jaw was set in the particular way of someone who has just publicly stumbled and is using anger as a crutch because humility would be too costly. After the session, he caught up with her in the hallway. She heard him coming from the cadence of his walk faster than usual. Harder than usual, and she turned before he reached her. You could have told me privately, he said. His voice was low. Before the session. She looked at him. I did flag it to Reyes first thing this morning. He told the element leaders to check the brief. Tate's jaw tightened. You know what I mean. I know you're telling me that I should have protected you from the consequences of a planning error, she said. I'm telling you that in the actual operation, the marsh doesn't care who's embarrassed. The marsh just floods. He stared at her. He had Logan's eyes for a moment, the flat, assessing look that preceded a decision about how to use someone's weakness, and then something in it shifted, moved off like a cloud passing, not disappearing, just moving. You set Logan up in that gym, he said. No, she said. Logan set himself up. I just didn't stop him. There's a difference. A big one, she said. I could have fought him the second he exceeded pressure. I waited until everyone in that room saw clearly what he was choosing to do. That's not a setup. That's a witness. Tate was quiet for a moment. Why, Hon? Because if I just put him down immediately, half the class would have decided it was a misunderstanding, she said. You needed to see the choice, not just the outcome. He looked at her for a long time. She let him look. Fix your route, she said. The marsh flood pattern runs north to south. If you move your assault element 40 degrees east on the approach, you add 12 minutes to the leg, but you stay on high ground the whole way. It's a cleaner line. She walked away before he could answer. She heard him stand there for a moment. Then she heard his footsteps change direction, heading back toward the planning room. She did not take credit for that. She didn't need to. What she needed was for Tate Holloway to still be capable of making a better decision under pressure when it mattered, because in 6 days they would all be in the field, and the weather system from the Bahamas was moving faster than anyone was saying in the official briefs, and Avery had been in enough situations to recognize the shape of a narrowing window. She updated her own notebook that evening with everything she had noticed in the planning session. She added a note about Tate's route. She added a separate note about the weather system's projected acceleration, which she had calculated herself using the raw meteorological data rather than the processed brief. At the bottom of the page, she wrote one sentence: "The exercise is going to be real before it's over." She did not mean it as a prediction so much as a recognition. She had been in the military for 10 years. She had learned that the most dangerous training exercises were the ones that looked controlled right up until the moment they weren't. The marsh didn't care about the schedule. The storm didn't care about the multinational timeline. And Tate Holloway, who had just revised his planning route because a woman he resented had told him the truth, had not yet learned to listen early enough to act before the margin disappeared. But he was trying. That was the thing she kept returning to. He was trying in the clumsy, effortful way of someone who has been given a very limited behavioral vocabulary and is discovering late that it doesn't cover everything the world is going to ask of him. Noah was different. Noah had always had the vocabulary. He just needed permission to use it. She saw him that evening at the edge of the training field, sitting with Portillo and Kim, and the three of them were going over the tidal current technique she'd shown Kim that morning. Noah was drawing the pattern in the dirt with a stick, explaining the principle, and Portillo was asking questions, and Kim was correcting him twice in a way that meant she'd understood it better than the diagram suggested. Avery watched them for a moment without approaching. She thought about what she'd written in her first report to Commander Sloan. The real problem is larger than one bully. Class 207 has developed a culture in which decent people remain silent to protect their own careers. She looked at the three of them in the fading light. Noah drawing in the dirt, Kim correcting, Portillo asking. The culture was moving, slowly, unevenly, like a current that had shifted direction and was still finding its new channel. But it was moving. That was the only thing she knew how to count. Not the speed, not the drama, not the moments of confrontation which were real and necessary, but not the point. The point was whether the movement continued when nobody was watching, when there was no witness to make the good choice feel safe, when the only reason to be decent was because decency was worth being. She went back to her bunk. She lay in the dark. Outside, the Carolina night was warm and heavy, and somewhere far out over the Atlantic, a storm system from the Bahamas was accelerating northward at a rate that the official forecast was going to catch up to about 18 hours after Avery's own calculations had already mapped its track. She was patient. She had learned patience in places that made Camp Hawthorne look like a retreat. But patience was not passivity, and stillness was not inaction. And the quiet transfer in Barracks C, who wrote in a spiral notebook by the light of a tactical flashlight, after lights out, was not the person Logan Mercer had seen when she walked into that dining hall with her tray. She had never been that person. She had simply been waiting for everyone in Class 207 to figure that out. Some of them almost had. And the storm that was going to finish the lesson was 6 days away and closing fast. 6 days felt like nothing. That was the thing about time when you were moving toward something you couldn't stop. It compressed. It folded in on itself. And by the morning of the coastal rescue exercise, when Class 207 assembled on the staging field at 0400 in full kit with the pre-dawn air already carrying more moisture than it should have, Avery could feel the compression in her chest like a hand pressing down. She had checked the weather data 3 times in the past 18 hours. The storm system from the Bahamas had accelerated exactly as her calculations had projected, and the official forecast had caught up to her numbers at 0200 that morning, 14 hours after she'd already mapped the track. The usable window for the exercise had compressed from 48 hours to somewhere between 30 and 34, depending on which direction the outer bands decided to push when they hit the coastline. She had passed that information to Commander Sloan at 0130. Sloan had taken it, read it, made 3 phone calls, and come back to Avery with the expression of a commanding officer doing the math on a situation where all the numbers were trending in the wrong direction. "The multinational review board is already on base," she said. "They flew in last night. If we cancel the exercise, we lose the evaluation window and 3 months of coordination with our allied partners." "I know," Avery said. "And if we run it smart, and we watch the window," Avery said. "We pull everyone before the storm hits the outer marsh. We build in a hard abort threshold at hour 26. She looked at Sloan directly. "And we make sure Tate Holloway does not make any unilateral route decisions without instructor approval." Sloan held her gaze. "You think he's going to be a problem?" "I think he's going to try to prove something," Avery said. "And I think without Logan there to absorb the pressure, he doesn't know where to put it yet." They had both been right. At 0400, standing on the staging field with the rest of Class 207, Avery ran her eyes down the assembled cadets and read the room, the way she always read rooms quickly, completely, with the particular attention of someone who has learned that the important information is usually in the things people are trying not to show. Noah was steady. He had his kit organized, his medical pack checked and rechecked, in the quiet, focused energy of someone who had made a decision about who he was going to be and was now committed to it. She had watched him over the past 6 days become incrementally more himself, and the version of Noah Bennett that showed up to the staging field at 0400 was measurably different from the one who had sat at Logan's table and said nothing. Portillo and Kim were together, which had become their default position in the past week, a small but visible realignment of the class's social gravity. They were going over something on Kim's planning sheet, pointing at it alternately, the easy shorthand of people who have started to trust each other's thinking. And Tate was at the front of his element jaw set, standing with a particular rigidity that Avery had learned to read as contained anxiety, expressing itself as aggression. He was going to be a problem. Not because he was malicious, she no longer believed his core was malicious, but because he was scared and he had very few tools for managing fear that didn't involve forward momentum and control. Instructor Reyes ran the final brief. He covered the exercise parameters, the abort protocols, the hard weather threshold. He looked at Tate's element when he mentioned the marsh routes and said clearly that all route modifications required instructor approval and radio confirmation. He was looking at Tate when he said it. Tate looked back at him and nodded. Avery watched the nod. It was the nod of someone who has heard the instruction and is already deciding under what circumstances it might not apply. She filed that. The exercise began at 0500. The first 3 hours were clean. Both elements moved to their designated staging points without incident. Communications were solid. The simulated hostile compound at the center of the exercise area was well constructed, and the volunteer hostages, 3 base personnel who had agreed to spend the night zip-tied in a concrete block building for the privilege of being rescued by a reconnaissance class, were in position and accounted for. Avery was running communications support for Element 1, which meant she was positioned at the relay point between the 2 assault elements and the instructor observation post, managing the radio traffic and keeping the tactical picture updated. It was technically exactly the job she was supposed to be doing as a communications track cadet. It also gave her a complete real-time view of everything both elements were doing. At 0745, Element 1 executed its approach to the compound with textbook precision. Noah was the point corpsman for the element's medical component, and he moved with his team in the careful, grounded way of someone whose training had locked into instinct. When the simulated breach happened at 0812, the element flowed through it the way good training is supposed to look when it actually works, everyone knowing their role, everyone trusting the person next to them. The first mini-climax of the morning came at 0830, when the radio net went briefly to static and Avery couldn't raise Element 2 for 4 minutes. 4 minutes is not a long time in most contexts. In a tactical exercise with a weather window that was compressing by the hour, 4 minutes of communication silence from a 12-person element moving through coastal marshland was enough to make every instructor at the observation post stop what they were doing and look at their radios. She got them. Did 0834. Tate's voice slightly clipped, slightly too controlled. Element 2 radio check. We're moving through a low signal corridor, continuing on plan. Instructor Reyes at the observation post said, copy element 2, confirm your current grid. The grid Tate gave was correct. It matched his approved route. Everything was fine. Avery wrote the 4-minute gap in her log and noted the time and moved on. At 09:15, the weather started. Not the storm itself that was still hours out, but the leading edge of it, the atmospheric pressure shift that comes in front of a system. Like a rumor before the news, a change in the air that you feel in your ears before you see anything in the sky. The wind picked up from the southeast. The humidity went from high to oppressive. The quality of the light changed in the particular way that experienced outdoors people learn to read and nervous ones learn to ignore. Avery noticed it. She looked at the weather data on her field tablet, checked the updated track, and recalculated. The abort threshold she had negotiated with Sloan at hour 26 was going to need to move. The storm was running hot. She needed to flag it. She radioed instructor Reyes. She told him that based on the updated atmospheric readings she was projecting, the outer rain bands hitting the Marsh sector approximately 4 hours earlier than the official forecast. That put the hard abort threshold at hour 22, not 26. Reyes was quiet for a moment on the radio. Then, copy Callahan, I'll run it up. She went back to managing the net. She did not hear the conversation Reyes had with Sloan. She did not need to. She knew what it would contain because she had been in enough of those conversations to know the shape of them. The tension between the timeline and the safety margin. The weight of the review board on base. The calculation of risk against consequence. What she did not know was that Tate Holloway at 0940 was already running his own calculation. The news reached her at 10:17, which was when Portillo's voice came over the radio at a cadence that was 3 beats too fast and told her everything before the words did. Relay, this is Element 2 Bravo. We have a situation. Tate Cadet Holloway adjusted the route. We're in the East Marsh. We're off the approved line. Everything in Avery's body went still in the way it did when a situation crossed from potential to actual. Not panic, the opposite of panic. The deep, cold clarity that had gotten her through the Caribbean at 0300 in the dark. Copy Bravo, she said. Her voice was flat and steady. Give me your current grid. Portillo gave it. She looked at her map. Her stomach did the thing that stomachs do when the numbers are wrong in the way that matters. They were 400 meters into the restricted marsh section, the section that flooded north to south under exactly the conditions that were currently developing, the section that Tate had been explicitly told not to enter, the section that Avery had flagged 6 days ago in the planning session. What's your status? She said. Tate didn't tell the instructors, Portillo said. His voice had the particular texture of someone who has just watched something happen that they couldn't stop and is now on the other side of it. He said the approved route added too much time. He said we'd be back on the line before the check-in. A pause. The radio's been cutting out. I don't think he knew how bad it was getting. How many people in your element? 12. Plus we've got the 2 hostage actors we picked up from the compound. 14 total. Noah, he's with element 1. He's not with us. Avery was already on the instructor net. She had Reyes and then Sloan in 30 seconds. She gave the grid. She gave the situation. She kept her voice completely level because emotion in a radio transmission is noise, and noise cost time and time was the one thing they did not have. Sloan's voice came back to her across the net, and what Avery heard in it was not anger. Not yet, but something underneath anger that was older and harder. The voice of someone who had let a warning go unheeded for too long and was now paying the price in the only currency that actually mattered. All elements, this is Commander Sloan. Exercises suspended. Actual emergency protocols effective immediately. All instructors move to emergency coordination. Callahan, you have the comms picture. Start talking. That was the moment everything changed. At 10:23, Avery dropped her communications support role and assumed emergency coordination. She did it without ceremony and without announcement because there was no time for either. She simply started doing the job that the situation required, and the instructors around her shifted to match without being told the way people do when someone with genuine competence takes a clear action in a crisis. Her voice on the net changed register. It was still controlled, but it had an additional quality now, the quality of someone who has run this before, who knows the steps and the timing and the margins, who is not improvising but executing against a framework built from experience in places where the consequences of a wrong decision were not a failing grade. She got rescue boats staged at the north entry point of the marsh in 11 minutes, which was faster than anyone at the observation post had thought was possible, given the wind that was now pushing hard from the southeast. She established a communication relay using the topography of the marsh itself. She knew which high points would give line-of-sight radio contact because she had been studying the terrain map since day one and had done 2 solo walks of the perimeter on her off time. She placed 2 cadets from Element 1's support group at relay positions that gave her continuous contact with Tate's element, even as the official radio network continued degrading. She reached Portillo at 10:31 and walked him through a route toward the nearest dry ground. She gave him the heading and compass, degrees, the distance in meters, and the specific landmarks to watch for. She told him to move slowly because rushing in soft marsh ground was how people lost their footing and how footing losses became something worse. At 10:38, Noah's voice came on the net. He had separated from Element 1. The moment Sloan had called, the emergency had found Instructor Reyes and had been attached to the rescue coordination as medical support. He was moving toward the marsh entry point with a kit that included everything he would need for lower extremity injuries and hypothermia, because Noah Bennett had been paying attention to the weather data too. "I've got the medical position on the north bank," he said. "What am I looking for?" "Ankle injuries most likely," Avery said. "Soft ground, uneven footing, people moving too fast. Set up on the high ground, 12 meters east of the marker, and keep your radio on this channel." "Copy," he said. "What else?" "When they come out," she said, "don't ask them to walk faster than they can. The instinct is going to be to push because we're all watching the weather. Don't. A second injury in the marsh is worse than a 3-minute delay." "Understood." A pause. 1 beat. "Are you going in?" She was already checking her kit. "Yes." "Alone?" "I'm taking Martinez and Chen from Element 1. They're solid." Noah was quiet for a second. "Then be careful in the North Channel. The current's running fast." She almost smiled. He had been paying attention. The tidal current principle, the thing she had showed him in a river crossing 3 weeks ago, the thing she had taught Kim, and Kim had taught Portillo, and Portillo had apparently passed to Noah somewhere in the last week without her even knowing it. "I'll watch the surface," she said. "Get your station set." She moved. Getting into the marsh required crossing the North Channel, which was, as Noah had correctly assessed, running faster than it should have been this early in the storm's approach. The outer rain bands were still 20 minutes out, but the upstream pressure was already pushing down through the drainage system in the channel that had been knee-deep at yesterday's reconnaissance, was now thigh-deep and moving with purpose. Avery went in first. She found the footing, mapped the current, and talked Martinez and Chen across behind her one at a time, hand to shoulder, the way you move people through water that is more dangerous than it looks. Chen was a strong swimmer and crossed without incident. Martinez was less comfortable in moving water, and Avery could feel it in the tension through his arm, the way his body was fighting the current instead of moving with it. "Don't plant," she said right against his ear, because the wind was picking up and radio voice wasn't enough. "Let your feet slide. You're fighting it. Stop fighting it." He stopped fighting it. He crossed. They moved into the marsh interior. What Avery had known from the map and confirmed on her perimeter walks was that the flooding pattern in the east section ran north to south, which meant that Tate's element, if they had continued east from their last known grid, was moving toward lower ground without realizing it. The water that looked stable at their current position would be moving by the time they tried to come back. She tracked them by radio, Portillo updating her every 3 minutes with a grid reference, and she ran the numbers in her head as she moved. At 10:47, she heard Portillo's voice drop a register and felt a thing in her chest that she had learned to treat as information rather than feeling. "We've got a problem," Portillo said. "Wait, Noah's not here. Cadet Bennett's not here. We've got a Cadet Holloway is down. There's a structure, training platform. Part of it came off and Tate's pinned. His leg. The water's..." Portillo stopped. Started again. "The water's coming up fast. It's coming up." She was already changing her heading. "Stay on the radio," she said. I need your exact position. Talk to me. Portillo talked. He talked for 7 minutes straight, describing their position and the platform and the water level with the desperate precision of someone who has understood that the information in his words is the only thing currently standing between Tate Holloway and a very bad outcome. His voice cracked twice. He kept talking. She found them at 10:54. The platform was a training structure that had been installed in the East Marsh section 2 seasons ago for an obstacle course that had since been retired. It was heavy timber construction, partially rotted on the east face from 2 years of salt air exposure, and part of the upper deck had separated from its supports at some point in the previous 24 hours, possibly from the pre-storm pressure, possibly from simple structural fatigue, and come down at an angle that had caught Tate across his left leg at the shin. I was face up in water that was currently at his collarbone and rising. He was conscious. That was the first thing she assessed. His eyes were open and tracking when she reached him, which told her that his airway was currently functional and his brain was currently oxygenated. And those 2 facts were the foundation she was going to build everything else on. The second thing she assessed was the platform position. The timber across his leg was heavy, but it was resting on the soft marsh bottom at an angle, which meant it had distributed some of its weight rather than bearing down fully. She could see from the way his face was set, the controlled expression of someone managing serious pain without letting it manage them, that the leg was injured but not catastrophically. The third thing she assessed was the water level. It had gone up 2 inches since Portillo had last reported it. It was going to go up more. Tate, she said, loud enough to cut through the wind. Can you hear me? Yes, he said. His voice was clipped and controlled and had the exact quality of someone who is working very hard not to let fear into their voice. Does your chest hurt? Any trouble breathing? Leg, he said. Just my leg. I know about your leg. I'm asking about your chest. Chest is fine, he said. The water. I see the water, she said. I'm going to deal with it. I need you to stop monitoring it and let me monitor it. Can you do that? A beat, then yes. She turned to Martinez and Chen. Get on the platform, east side. I need 2 people pushing up and north on my count. Don't lift it, straight, push it north and up simultaneously. It'll pivot off the south support. She looked at them both. Do you understand exactly what I'm describing? Martinez said, push north and up, it pivots south. Yes, on my count, not before. She looked at the water. Portillo, get over here. You're going to pull Tate north as soon as the timber clears. You pull hard and you pull straight and you don't stop until he's fully clear. Understood. Portillo was already moving to position. Understood. She went into the water herself. She went in next to Tate, not because she was going to pull. Portillo had the pull, but because Tate's head was 8 inches above the waterline and that gap was closing and someone needed to be in the water next to him to make sure it did not close all the way. She got her arm under his back and angled his upper body so that his face was as far from the surface as she could get it with the water where it was. He made a sound when she moved him involuntary, the sound of someone absorbing significant pain, and she felt it through her arm. I've got you, she said quietly, just to him. He looked at her. His eyes were different from the eyes that had watched her across planning sessions, in dining halls and training fields, with Logan's borrowed contempt. They were just eyes right now, just a person's eyes, afraid and present and asking something they didn't have words for. I've got you, she said again. Count of 3. She looked at Martinez and Chen. She looked at Portillo. 1, she said. Martinez and Chen set their feet on the platform frame. 2. Portillo's hands found Tate's shoulders. 3. Martinez and Chen pushed north and up. The platform groaned. It resisted for 2 seconds that felt much longer than 2 seconds, and then the south support gave, and the timber pivoted exactly as she had calculated, and Tate's leg came clear, and Portillo pulled, and Avery lifted from underneath, and they moved him out of the water and onto a section of stable high ground 6 feet away. He was out. He lay on the ground and breathed. Hard, ragged, the breathing of someone who has just spent 20 minutes managing their own fear through willpower alone, and has finally been given permission to stop managing it. Avery assessed the leg. The shin was fractured, she could tell from the swelling and the angle without needing to probe. And she didn't probe because there was no reason to cause additional pain to gather information she already had. She splinted it with what she had and what Portillo had and what Martinez's extra gear produced when she asked for it, and she did the whole thing in 4 minutes and 20 seconds. Then she looked at Tate. He was looking at her. Something had changed in his face in the past few minutes that she didn't have a clean clinical term for. It wasn't gratitude, not exactly though. That was part of it. It was something more uncomfortable than gratitude. The feeling of being seen doing something you cannot take back. "You came for me," he said. His voice was raw, not from pain, from something else. "Yes," she said. "After everything." He stopped. "Tried again. After what we did, after what I said to you." She was wrapping the splint. She kept her hands moving while she talked. "What you said to me doesn't factor into whether I pull you out of the water, Tate." He was quiet. "Why not?" he said. She tied off the wrap and looked at him directly. "Because that's not what this is," she said. "This isn't about you and me. You're a cadet in my operational area, and you're injured and the water's rising. Those are the facts. The facts don't care about the dining hall." He looked at her for a long time. She watched something working in him, something difficult and slow and absolutely necessary. "I knew the route was wrong," he said. "I knew the brief said to get instructor approval. I changed it anyway because I wanted—" He stopped. His jaw worked. "I wanted to show that our element was faster, that I could do it better than I just wanted to prove something." "I know," she said. "People could have." "I know," she said. He closed his eyes. When he opened them, something had shifted. Not resolved, not finished, but shifted. Like a door that has been locked for a long time and has finally moved just slightly on its hinges. "I'm sorry," he said. She looked at him. She believed him. She also knew that an apology in a crisis has a different weight than an apology in daylight, and that what mattered was whether the thing behind the apology would survive the return to ordinary life, where the stakes were lower and the pressure was off and the easier habits were always there waiting. But it was a start. That was what she said to herself. It was a start. She got him up with Martinez and Chen on either side, and they began moving toward the north bank, and the wind was running hard, and the first outer bands of rain were reaching them now. The kind of rain that comes ahead of a serious storm, light enough to ignore and significant enough to mean you should not. She radioed Noah first. "We're coming out north," she said. "One fracture left tibia. I've got it splinted. The patient is stable and ambulatory with assistance. ETA approximately 11 minutes. "Ready on the bank," Noah said. His voice had the quality it always had when he was doing the work he had trained to do. Grounded, certain, in the right place. "Also," she said, then paused. "What?" "Good call on the channel current," she said. A brief silence. "You didn't even look like you needed the warning." "I always need good information," she said, "even when I don't look like it." She heard him almost say some of them. Then, 11 minutes, I'll be here. They came out of the marsh at 11:27, 14 people, 2 of them hostage actors who had expected a routine training exercise and had instead experienced something they would talk about for a long time, and Tate Holloway on a field splint with Martinez and Chen keeping him upright and moving, and Portillo on his other side talking him through every step in the focused, matter-of-fact way of someone who had discovered he was capable of exactly this when the moment arrived. Commander Sloan was on the bank. The review board was behind her, the international observers who had come for a simulation and were instead watching something they had not expected to watch. Some of them had their hands at their sides in the stillness of people who have just seen something they were not prepared for. Sloan's eyes found Avery the moment she came up the bank. The look between them lasted 2 seconds and contained an entire conversation. Then Sloan moved to Tate and the medical team took over, and the machinery of the aftermath began to turn. At 11:31, with all 14 people accounted for and the rain starting properly, now beginning to come down in the serious, committed way of a storm that means business, Commander Sloan called the class together on the north bank. They were wet and tired, and some of them were shaking, not from cold, but from the particular release that comes after sustained high stress. They were looking at each other in the slightly stunned way of people who have just been through something real and are discovering that who they were during it is not entirely who they had expected to be. Sloan looked at them for a moment. Then she turned and looked at Avery. "Chief Petty Officer Callahan," she said. The name landed in the group like a stone in still water, the ripples going out and out. Not Cadet Callahan, not the comms transfer, not the new office girl, Chief Petty Officer Callahan. Noah's head came up. Kim stopped moving. Portillo's mouth opened slightly and then closed. Even Tate, lying on the medical blanket with Noah's hands on his leg, went very still. "You have the group," Sloan said. Avery turned to face class 207. She looked at them wet and stunned, and beginning in the particular way that only real situations can produce to understand something that no training brief had managed to teach them. She did not soften what she was about to say. She did not perform it. She simply said it. "My name is Avery Callahan. I hold the rank of Chief Petty Officer, Naval Special Warfare Command, and I was assigned to this class to evaluate your judgment, your character, and your willingness to protect each other when it matters." She paused. Let that land. "The exercise you thought you were in ended when Tate changed his route without authorization. What you were actually in started the moment that happened." Nobody spoke. "Everything you did after that point was real," she said. "The decisions you made were real decisions. The people you chose to be were real choices." She looked across their faces. "Some of you chose well. Some of you are still figuring out what that means. All of you are going to have to sit with what you did or didn't do today for the rest of your careers." The rain came down harder. Nobody moved. "We're going to talk about all of it," she said. "But right now we're going to get out of the rain and make sure everyone's accounted for. Move." They moved. And as they moved, Avery heard behind the rain, behind the wind, beneath the noise of 14 people getting organized and moving towards shelter. Noah Bennett say something to Portillo in a voice that was quiet and rough with something she didn't have a word for. "She was here the whole time," Noah said. "I know," Portillo said. "She was here and she didn't—" Noah stopped. Tried again. "She didn't have to save him. Tate, after everything." Portillo was quiet for a moment. "Yeah," he said. "I know." She didn't turn around. She kept moving. She kept the group moving in front of her, and she held the rear, and she watched the marsh behind them, and the storm coming in, and the narrow channel they had crossed, and she thought about what the water looked like when the current was telling the truth. She thought about what she had written in her notebook on the last night before the exercise. The exercise is going to be real before it's over. It had been real. It was real. And what she had found in the reality of it was the thing she had come here looking for. Not the misconduct, not the bully, not the pattern of silence and fear that she had documented in 16 days of spiral-bound notes. What she had found were the people on the other side of all that. The ones who were still becoming who they were going to be. The ones who, when the current shifted and the water rose and there was no one watching to make the right choice feel safe, had made it anyway. That was the thing she would carry out of the marsh with her. Everything else was just weather. The storm hit Camp Hawthorne fully at 1400, and by the time the last cadet was inside and accounted for, the rain was coming down so hard that visibility across the staging field had dropped to near zero. Nobody was going anywhere. The base went into weather lockdown, which meant the formal debriefs that Commander Sloan had planned for 1700 got pushed to the following morning, which meant that every cadet in Class 207 had a long, wet, enclosed evening to sit with everything that had happened. That kind of time is not comfortable. Avery knew it. She had planned for it in the same way she planned for most things, not by trying to control what people felt, but by being clear-eyed about the fact that what they felt was going to shape what they did next, and that the space between the crisis and the accounting was often where the most important decisions got made. She spent the early part of the evening in the medical bay with Noah and the base surgeon, making sure Tate's fracture had been properly evaluated. The field splint had held well. Noah noted this with the specific professional satisfaction of a corpsman whose training had produced a real outcome in a real situation, and the X-ray confirmed a clean mid-shaft fracture of the left tibia that would require 6 weeks of recovery and keep Tate out of the field for at minimum 1 training cycle. Tate was awake during all of this. He had been given pain management, but not enough to make him unclear which was his own request, and the surgeon had respected it. He lay on the examination table and looked at the ceiling with the focused, slightly hollow expression of someone running through the events of the morning on a continuous loop. Noah finished the splint check and stepped back. He looked at Tate with the careful neutrality of a corpsman in a professional context, which was almost but not entirely successful at covering the more complicated thing underneath it. "Clean break," Noah said. "You got lucky." "Yeah," Tate said. He did not look away from the ceiling. Noah gathered his equipment. He moved toward the door. He paused. Tate, he said. Tate looked at him. I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me straight. A beat, okay? Weston said, the injury report from week 3. That was you and Logan, wasn't it? The silence that followed had weight to it. Not the silence of someone deciding whether to lie Avery watching from the corner of the room, could read the difference, but the silence of someone who has been carrying something heavy for long enough that the moment of putting it down had become almost harder than continuing to carry it. Yes, Tate said. Noah nodded once. He didn't say anything else. He walked out. Avery watched him go. Then she looked at Tate. He's going to give a statement, she said. I know, Tate said. So are you. He closed his eyes. I know. She moved to the chair beside his bone. She sat down. She did something she did not do very often, which was wait without an agenda. Simply be present, because she had learned in the Caribbean and in a dozen other places that there were moments when the most effective thing you could do was give a person the space to get to the truth at their own speed rather than pulling them toward it. After a while, Tate said, I knew it was wrong with Weston. I knew it in the moment. Tell me. He opened his eyes. He looked at the ceiling and talked. He talked for 20 minutes without Avery saying more than 6 words. And what he described was not a dramatic event, but something more ordinary and more disturbing. A pattern of escalating pressure tests that Logan had framed as resilience training, as preparation for the real world, as the kind of hardening that separated people who could handle it from people who couldn't. And Tate had participated because Logan's framing had felt true in the way that things feel true when you want them to, when believing them is more comfortable than the alternative. How was convincing, Tate said. Again, the same word he had used before. The explanation that had stopped being an explanation. I know, Avery said. That doesn't make it okay. No, she said, it doesn't. He turned his head and looked at her. His face had the scoured quality of someone who has recently been stripped of something and is not yet sure what to build in the space it had occupied. Are you going to recommend I get removed from the program? She looked at him directly. That's not my decision, but I'll tell you what I'm going to say in my report. She paused. You changed the route without authorization, and people were endangered as a direct result of that decision. That goes in. Your conduct in the marsh, staying calm, keeping your team moving, not making the situation worse after you were injured, that goes in too. The fact that you told the truth when Noah asked you about Weston instead of lying, that goes in. She looked at him evenly. What you did with the truth from here on is the part I can't write yet because it hasn't happened. I was quiet for a moment. Do you think people like me change? It was such a naked question. So unlike the controlled armor-forward person he had been through most of the course, that for a moment it caught her off guard. Not because she didn't have an answer, but because the quality of the question told her something important about what the day had done to him. I think you changed today, she said. Whether you keep going is up to you. He looked at the ceiling again. Something in his face settled not into peace, but into something more honest than peace. Something like readiness. Okay, he said. She stood up. She was at the door when he said her name. Not Callahan, not Chief. Her name. Avery. She turned. Thank you, he said, for not leaving me in there. She looked at him for a moment. I don't leave people in the water, she said. That's not a favor. That's just who I am. She walked out. The formal investigation opened at 0800 the following morning, 2 hours after the storm passed and the base returned to normal operations. Commander Sloan ran it out of the main briefing room with the base legal officer present and a representative from Naval Special Warfare Command who had driven down from Quantico the previous night and arrived looking like someone who had been in a car for 3 hours and had questions that could not wait. His name was Captain Warren Devlin, and he had the particular quality of senior naval officers who have spent enough time reading incident reports to recognize the shape of an institutional failure before all the details are in. He was not unkind, but he was not interested in comfort, and when he sat across from Commander Sloan at 0745 before the investigation opened and looked at the complete version of Avery's notebook, all 22 days of it, organized and time-stamped and written with the precision of someone who understood that documentation was not an administrative exercise, but a form of protection. He was very quiet for a long time. How long have you known, he said. Sloan did not flinch. I suspected from week 2, she said. I had 3 incident reports that were inconclusive. I had no on-record witnesses. I made the decision to continue the course and tighten my observation protocols. You had a classified evaluator embedded in the class, Devlin said. He was not raising his voice. He didn't need to. I did, Sloan said, and her documentation is now in front of you. The documentation that shows the culture had been running for months before she arrived. Yes, Devlin looked at the notebook again. Rebecca, he said, and the shift from rank to first name was its own kind of weight. You missed it. Before she got here, you missed it. Sloan was quiet for a moment. Yes, she said, I did. He looked at her for a long time. He nodded once. Then he picked up his pen and his own notebook and said, let's get started. Avery gave her testimony first, which took 90 minutes and covered everything from her initial briefing through the marsh evacuation. She answered every question without embellishment and without minimization. And when she was asked directly whether she believed Commander Sloan had acted appropriately in all circumstances, she said clearly that Sloan had acted on the information available to her, that the culture in Class 207 had been carefully constructed to be invisible from above, and that the failure was institutional as much as individual. Devlin looked at her when she said that. You're being generous, he said. I'm being accurate, she said. There's a difference. He almost smiled. Carry on. The cadets were called in one by one through the morning. Noah went first and gave a complete, detailed statement that covered everything from the dining hall on day one through the marsh extraction, including his own silence during the first week and the specific moment when he had decided to raise his hand in the gymnasium and what it had cost him to do it. He gave the statement in the flat, clear voice of someone who has thought carefully about what truth requires and has decided to give it all rather than the comfortable portion. When he was done, Devlin asked him one question. Cadet Bennett, in your assessment, at the point when Cadet Mercer was choking Cadet Callahan and you raised your hand to give a witness statement, were you afraid? Noah looked at him. Yes, sir. Of what? Of Logan, Noah said. Of what he might do afterward. Of what the other cadets might think of me. He paused. Of being wrong about what I thought I saw and making it worse. But you raised your hand anyway. Yes, sir. Why? Noah was quiet for one beat. Because she tapped the mat, he said, and he didn't let go, and someone had to say so. Devlin wrote something in his notebook. He nodded without looking up. Thank you, Cadet Bennett. You're excused. Portillo's statement corroborated everything. Kim's statement added detail about the equipment sabotage she had seen Tate in the equipment bay, the morning of the navigation exercise at a time, and in a manner that was consistent with the damage Avery had found, and she gave this detail with the particular resolution of someone who has decided that loyalty to the right things is more important than loyalty to the wrong people. Then Logan Mercer came in. He had known it was coming. He had been in barracks restriction since the gymnasium incident, which meant he had had 9 days in a confined space with his own thoughts and very little else. And the Logan Mercer who walked into the briefing room at 1300 was not entirely the same person who had crossed Avery's throat with his forearm on that mat. Not transformed, not reformed, not the end of his story by any means, but different in the specific way of someone who has had a very long time to be alone with a truth they have been avoiding and has finally exhaustedly stopped running from it. He sat across from Devlin and Sloan and the legal officer, and he put his hands flat on the table and he looked at them and he said before anyone asked him a question, I want to give a complete statement, everything. Devlin looked at the legal officer. The legal officer nodded. Someone started the recorder. Logan talked for 2 hours and 11 minutes. What he described went further back than anyone in the room had fully documented. It went back to week 3 of the course to a system of pressure tests that he had designed and implemented with Tate's participation tests that had been framed to the junior cadets as voluntary resilience training and had in practice been anything but. He named 4 cadets who had been pressured. He described the specific methods. He described the Weston incident with a clarity and detail that made the legal officer stop writing at one point and just sit very still. He described his actions in the gymnasium. He did not minimize them, and he did not construct an alternative narrative. He said he had applied full force to Avery's throat with the intention of humiliating her into admitting she did not belong in the program. He said he had continued after the tap because he was not thinking clearly about anything except winning. He said he had claimed she attacked him without cause and knew that claim was false when he made it. He said all of this in a voice that was controlled but not comfortable. The voice of someone doing a hard thing because they have run out of easier options and have finally at some cost recognized that the hard thing was the right thing. When he finished, Devlin was quiet for a long moment. "Why?" Devlin said, not as an accusation, as a genuine question. Logan looked at the table. "Because I genuinely believed that the way I operated was what made a unit strong, that making people prove themselves. That pressure, that..." He stopped, started again. "I thought fear and respect were the same thing. I thought if people were afraid to fail in front of me, they would work harder, train harder, be better." He paused. "I was wrong. I know I was wrong. I knew it in the marsh when she went back in for Tate, and I wasn't there. And I couldn't have done what she did, not because I'm not capable physically, because I would have decided it wasn't worth it." A silence. "She went back for someone who had been part of the problem," Logan said, "because it was the right thing to do, not because she felt good about it, because it was the right thing." His jaw worked. "I've never operated that way in my life. I've always made it personal. He stopped. "I think I need help. I know that sounds like I'm trying to get something. I'm not. I'm saying it because it's true." Devlin looked at him for a long time. Then he looked at Sloan. Then he made a note. The investigation concluded its testimony phase at 16:45. Avery did not attend the closing session of the investigation, which was a deliberative meeting between Devlin Sloan and the base legal officer that ran from 1700 to 2100. She had given her testimony. What happened next was not hers to control, and she had learned enough about how investigations work to know that trying to manage the outcome after the facts were on the table was both futile and a misuse of energy. She spent the evening with Noah Portillo and Kim in the common room of Barracks A, which had a coffee machine that produced something approximating coffee, and a set of institutional chairs that were at least honest about their discomfort. The four of them sat in a configuration that would have been unthinkable 3 weeks ago and talked about what had happened and what it meant and what came next. It was Noah who said the thing that stuck. "I keep thinking about what would have happened if you hadn't been here," he said. He was looking at his coffee. "Like if the class had just kept running, without anyone from the inside watching, how long it would have kept going." "Probably until someone got seriously hurt," Kim said. "Someone did get seriously hurt," Portillo said quietly. "Weston, Torres, the ones who filed the reports that went nowhere." "I mean seriously enough that it couldn't be explained away," Kim said. She said it carefully, but without softening it, which was one of the things Avery had come to appreciate about Kim. She was precise with language in a way that most people weren't willing to be, because precision sometimes required saying uncomfortable things out loud. "That's why reporting matters," Avery said. "Not because every report stops what's happening immediately, because each one creates a record, and the record doesn't go away." Noah looked at her. "You put it in the notebook," he said. "Every day," she said, "even when it felt like nothing was going to come of it." She thought about the dining hall on day one, the table by the door, the sound of the word quota moving through the class like something contagious, the cracked compass housing, and the missing batteries. "Especially then," she said. Portillo turned his coffee cup in his hands. "I delivered that message for him," he said. "The thing about the testing, about special treatment," he was looking at his cup. "I knew it wasn't right and I did it anyway." "I know," Avery said. "No. I've been thinking about why," he said, trying to really understand it, not just say I was scared of him. "Because I was, but that's not the whole thing." He looked up. "I think I needed to belong to something, and he was the thing, and belonging to it felt more real than whatever it was costing." The room was quiet for a moment. "That's the most honest thing anyone said in this room all week," Noah said. Portillo almost laughed. "Almost. Don't make it a thing, Bennett." "Too late," Kim said. "It's a thing." Avery looked at the three of them. She thought about what she had written in her first report to Sloan. "The real problem is larger than one bully. Class 207 has developed a culture in which decent people remain silent to protect their own careers." She thought about what she would write in the final report. That decent people do not stay silent when they are given a clear view of what their silence costs. That the view sometimes has to be given to them forcibly through circumstances that strip away the comfortable ambiguity. but that when the view was clear, most people, not all, but most, chose the right side of it. What happens to Logan? Kim said. I don't know yet, Avery said. That's not my decision to make. What do you think should happen? She looked at Kim. I think he needs to understand what he did and why he did it before he's put in a position of authority over anyone. I think that's not a quick process, and I think the system that made it easy for him to operate the way he did, for as long as he did, needs to change, and that change needs to involve people at every level. She paused, including Sloan, including me. We all had a piece of this. Kim was quiet. Including you, you just documented it. I spent 16 days documenting it while it was still happening, Avery said. Every day I was in that class watching it happen was a day someone with less protection than I have could have been hurt. You needed the evidence, Noah said. Yes, she said, and that's a real reason. It's also a real cost. Both things are true. Nobody argued with that. The room held the weight of it for a moment. At 21:30, her phone vibrated. A message from Sloan. 3 words. Come to my office. She stood. She looked at the 3 of them. Get some sleep, she said. Tomorrow's going to be long. She walked to Sloan's office. The decisions that Devlin and Sloan had reached were delivered to her in the measured, careful language of people who had thought hard about both the accountability and the consequences. Logan Mercer was to be removed from the advanced reconnaissance pipeline immediately and reassigned to a non-leadership role pending the outcome of a formal military review. The review board would determine the extent of additional disciplinary action up to and including separation from service. He was also required to enter a structured behavioral accountability program, a relatively new initiative that had shown some results in similar cases and was, in Devlin's words, a better investment than punishment alone. When Sloan told her this, she waited. Your recommendation, Devlin said. He was looking at her directly. In your professional judgment, should Logan Mercer lose his career? She had known this question was coming. She had been turning it over since the gymnasium, since the marsh, since the medical bay. When Tate had looked at the ceiling and said, I knew it was wrong in the moment, she had been turning it over in the specific way she turned over decisions that mattered, not looking for the answer that felt satisfying, but looking for the one that was true. No, she said, not at this point. Devlin's expression didn't change. Explain your thinking. Removing him from the pipeline is the right call, she said. He is not ready to lead anyone, and putting him in a position of authority over other people while he is still operating the way he operates would be genuinely dangerous. That stays. She looked at Devlin. But career destruction without genuine engagement with what caused the behavior is just punishment. It makes the institution feel like it's done something without actually addressing the problem. Logan Mercer, at a different base in a different unit, without the specific culture he created here, he's going to create it again unless something actually changes in him. You believe that's possible, Sloan said. I believe today made him more possible than he was yesterday, Avery said. Whether he stays possible or not is on him. But we should give the possibility room. Devlin wrote something. He looked at Sloan. Something passed between them that had the quality of a decision landing into place. Tate Holloway, Sloan said. Disciplinary action for the unauthorized route change, Avery said. It endangered people. That has to be on record. She paused. But he told the truth when Noah asked him about Weston. He could have denied it. He didn't. He stayed calm during the Marsh crisis and kept his team moving even while he was injured. And he accepted accountability for the route decision without trying to shift blame. She looked at Sloan. I'd recommend he be given the option to repeat the course after remedial training. Under real conditions with actual stakes, he made better choices than he's made in this class. That matters. He almost got people killed, Sloan said. Yes, Avery said, and he's going to know that for the rest of his life. The question is whether what he does with that knowledge is useful or just painful. She kept her eyes steady. I think it can be useful if we set it up right. Sloan and Devlin exchanged another look. The institutional changes, Devlin said. This was the part that mattered most to Avery, more than Logan's fate or Tate's second chance or any individual consequence. The part that would determine whether Class 207 became a cautionary story or an actual turning point. Sloan laid them out, confidential reporting procedures with a dedicated channel outside the chain of command. Rotating team leadership throughout the course so that no single personality could become the gravitational center of the class. Recorded and witnessed safety drills so that violations were documented automatically rather than dependent on individual willingness to report. Mandatory intervention training for all instructors. Annual anonymous culture assessments with external review. And one more thing, Sloane's idea, her specific personal contribution to the list, the one she had proposed at 2000, and that Devlin had approved without modification. Every incoming class at Camp Hawthorne would receive a formal brief in week 1 that described what had happened in class 207. Not in general terms, in specific ones, with the names of the people who had spoken and the names of the people who had not and the consequences of both. The culture of silence could not be dismantled by policies alone. It had to be named and held up and shown for what it was, and the people who would come after had to know that the institution had seen it and chosen differently. Avery listened to all of it. When Sloane finished, she was quiet for a moment. "You're putting your own name in that brief," she said. "I am," Sloane said. "I missed it. That's part of the story." Avery looked at her. Something shifted in the space between them, something that had been slightly formal and guarded since the beginning, the careful distance of two professionals navigating a complicated assignment. It shifted into something more honest. "That's the hardest part to write," Avery said. "I know," Sloane said. "That's why it has to be in there." Avery nodded. She stood. She extended her hand and Sloane took it, and the handshake lasted the right amount of time. Not formal, not warm, but true. She walked back to Barracks C through the post-storm quiet of the base. The air had that specific clean quality it gets after a serious storm passes, washed and still and slightly unreal. She could hear the water in the drainage channels still running hard, moving the storm through and out. She went to her bunk. She opened her notebook. She turned to a clean page and wrote the date and time, and then sat with the pen over the page for a moment. Then she wrote one sentence. "They chose accountability. That's where it starts." She closed the notebook. She lay on her back and looked at the ceiling and thought about Logan Mercer sitting alone somewhere in the barracks, and Tate Holloway in the medical bay with his leg in a cast and his conscience in considerably worse shape, and Noah Bennett who had raised his hand and kept raising it and was still raising it every time it cost him something. She thought about the moment in the marsh when she had put her arm under Tate's back and said, "I've got you," and meant it not as a comfort, but as a fact, not because he deserved it, but because it was what she was there to do. She thought about the difference between those two things, deserving and doing, and how the distance between them was where character actually lived. Outside, the Carolina night was settling back into its ordinary self. The storm had passed. The marsh was still, flooding would be for another few hours, but the worst of it was through. And in the morning there would be a long, difficult series of conversations that would continue for weeks and probably months, conversations about what had been built in Class 207 and how it had been dismantled and what would be built in its place. She was not afraid of those conversations. She had been in harder ones. What she was for the first time since she had stepped off the transit shuttle with her duffel bag and her spiral notebook was something she hadn't entirely expected to be. She was hopeful, not naively, not without reservation, but genuinely in the specific way that hope arrives when you have watched people choose better than they chose before and understood that the choice was real and cost them something, and they made it anyway. That kind of hope was the hardest kind to earn. She closed her eyes. She slept. 3 months is not a long time. In the military, 3 months is barely a breath, enough time for a fracture to heal, enough time for paperwork to move through the right channels, enough time for the people who were broken to begin the slow, unglamorous work of deciding who they were going to be instead. Not enough time to finish anything. Barely enough time to start. But it was enough time for Camp Hawthorne to change. And change, Avery had learned, was less about the dramatic moments, the gymnasium, the marsh, the investigation, and more about the 100 small decisions that followed them, made by ordinary people in ordinary moments, when nobody was watching, and the easier choice was always right there. She came back on a Thursday morning in early autumn off a transport from Virginia, same duffel bag on the same shoulder, same spiral notebook in her cargo pocket. The base looked the same. The air smelled the same salt and pine, and the particular coastal humidity that never fully lifted even in October. But she had barely reached the main building before she felt something different in it, the way you feel a change in air pressure before you can name its source. The first person she saw was Portillo. I was crossing the staging area in the opposite direction, kid on his back moving with the purposeful stride of someone between tasks. He saw her and stopped. For a half second, he had the look of someone whose brain is catching up to what their eyes are reporting. Then something in his face opened up, and he crossed the distance between them in about 4 steps and extended his hand and said, "Chief Callahan," with a steadiness and a directness that was nothing like the flushed, sideways-eyed cadet who had delivered Logan's message to her in the hallway 6 weeks into the course. She shook it. "Portillo, how's the class?" "Good," he said, then reconsidering. "Different. Better, I think. It's different enough that it feels better." He paused. "Kim's running one of the planning elements now. She's good at it." "I know she is," Avery said. He nodded. He looked like he wanted to say something else, something that was taking a moment to organize itself into words. "I told my team," he said, "the new group I'm with now, I told them about what happened, about delivering that message for Logan, about staying quiet." He looked at her directly. "I didn't make it abstract. I used my name." She looked at him. She felt something in her chest that was warm and specific. "How did that go?" "Weird," he said, honestly. "Uncomfortable. One guy didn't really get why I was telling them." A pause. "But one woman, Cadet Harris, she came up to me afterward and said something similar had happened to her in her previous unit, and she had never told anyone because she thought it would make things worse. And she said hearing me talk about it made her think maybe she could say something." He stopped. "I don't know if she will, but she's thinking about it now." Avery nodded. "That's the work," she said. "Yeah," he said. "I'm starting to understand that." He had somewhere to be. They both did. He gave her a quick nod and moved on, and she watched him go and thought about the shape of courage, not the dramatic version, not the gymnasium version, but this version, the everyday one. A person telling a true and uncomfortable story about himself in a room full of people. He needed to respect him with no guarantee of how it would land. That version was harder. And it lasted longer, and it was the one that actually changed things. She went to find Commander Sloan. Sloan was in her office, which looked the same as it always had: black coffee, old paper, the particular organized density of a workspace belonging to someone who has too much to do and has made peace with that fact. She looked up when Avery knocked, and something in her face shifted in a way that was not quite a smile, but was in the same family. "You made good time," Sloan said. "Caught an early transport." Avery sat in the chair across from the desk. "Walk me through it." Sloan did. She talked for 20 minutes, and what she described was not a transformed institution. She was too honest for that framing, but a changed one. The confidential reporting channel had received 11 contacts in its first 6 weeks, 7 of which described situations that had been addressed before they escalated. The rotating leadership structure had produced 3 cadets who had surprised their instructors with capacity they had not shown under the previous system, where Logan's dominance had kept certain personalities from fully emerging. The recorded safety drills had already flagged 2 protocol violations in other classes, both minor, both corrected. "The week 1 brief," Avery said. "How is that landing?" Sloan was quiet for a moment. "Differently with different people," she said honestly. "Some cadets come in defensive. They hear it as accusatory, like we're telling them they're going to be the problem before they've done anything. A few have said so in the feedback forms." She looked at Avery. "But more of them, more than I expected, say it's the first time an institution has been honest with them about how things actually go wrong. Not in theory, in this specific place, with specific barn." She paused. "One cadet wrote in his feedback form that it was the most useful thing he'd heard in 6 weeks of churning, because it told him what to watch for instead of just telling him what not to do." Avery thought about that. "That's the difference," she said. "Telling people be ethical is abstract. Telling them, here is exactly how a person convinced themselves and everyone around them that what they were doing was justified. That's a map." "Devlin agrees," Sloan said. "He's recommending the brief model to 2 other training programs." Avery nodded. She looked at Sloan. "And yet, how are you, Hanarmo?" The question landed in the room, and Sloan received it without deflecting, which itself was a change from the careful professional distance of 3 months ago. "Honest answer," Sloan said. "Always." "I'm better than I was," Sloan said. "But I still go back to those 3 incident reports, the ones I accepted without pushing harder." She looked at her hands. "I had the reports. I had the pattern. I chose to wait for something concrete rather than dig for it. and the waiting had a kick in. She looked up. I'm not done with that yet. No, Avery said. You probably won't be entirely. She held Sloane's gaze. But you put your name in the brief. That matters. It matters if it changes something, Sloane said. It already did, Avery said. Portillo just told me a cadet in his new group is thinking about reporting something because she heard him talk about his role in what happened here. That change started with you being willing to say out loud with your name attached that you missed it. She paused. Accountability isn't useful because it makes us feel better. It's useful because other people can build on it. Sloane was quiet for a long moment. Graduation's at 1400, she said. I know, Avery said. That's why I'm here. The graduation of the rebuilt Class 207 was held on the main parade ground at 1400 on a Thursday that had the clean, bright quality of an autumn day that has decided to be straightforward about itself. No drama, no complications, just clear air and honest light in the particular stillness of a moment that has been earned. Avery stood at the edge of the assembled group and watched the cadets file in. She recognized the changed class in the way they moved, the way they positioned themselves relative to each other. Not in the hierarchical clustering of 3 months ago, the tight constellation around Logan's gravitational pull, but in the looser, more honest arrangement of people who have decided to trust each other on the basis of demonstrated character rather than proximity to power. Kim received her evaluation citation second in the ceremony. When her name was called, she walked to the front with the exact quality of someone who is not performing confidence, but simply has it, and Avery thought about the cadet who had sat across from her in the planning room and said, "Can you show me the title current thing?" and had absorbed the principle in one pass and asked 3 follow-up questions and built from there steadily without fanfare. Into the person standing at the front of that formation. Portillo received his citation fourth. He caught Avery's eye briefly when he returned to his position and gave her the smallest nod, the kind that means "I know not thank you," which was the right thing. She gave it back. And then Commander Sloane called Noah Bennett's name. The Class Leadership Award was not given for the fastest or the strongest. That was the first thing Sloane said before she said his name, and she said it clearly enough that everyone present understood it was not a preamble but the point. The award was given for the quality of character that the program was designed to develop: judgment, honesty, and the specific kind of courage that shows up not in combat, but in the moment when the easier choice is silence, and a person chooses to speak anyway. Noah walked to the front. He was not composed in the smooth performance-ready way that some people are at ceremonies. He was real in that moment, slightly flushed, jaw set, eyes forward. The genuine version, the one that had been visible since the day he had raised his hand in the gymnasium, and his voice had been slightly unsteady, but completely clear. Sloane presented the award. She shook his hand. She said something to him quietly, too low for anyone else to hear. Noah nodded once, and whatever she said, it landed somewhere important in him, because his expression shifted in a way that was not pride exactly, but was in the same territory. The feeling of being seen accurately and finding it to be okay. He returned to his position. He looked at Avery. She nodded. He looked back at the front of the formation. That was enough. That was exactly enough. The twist that nobody had expected came 20 minutes into the ceremony when Tate Holloway walked onto the parade ground. Not in formation, not as a graduate. He walked in from the side entrance with a slight favoring of his left leg. The fracture had healed clean, but the body remembers always. And he was in service uniform, not graduation dress. And he carried himself with a specific quality that was difficult to name because it was genuinely new. Not Logan's borrowed confidence. Not the desperate forward lean of someone trying to prove something. Something quieter. Something that had cost him more to arrive at than anything the marsh had cost him physically. He had requested permission to address the incoming class. Sloane had granted it. Nobody in the graduating class had known he was coming. He stood in front of them, the new group, 30-some faces that didn't know him, that had only heard his name in the context of the Week 1 brief as the person who had changed the route and nearly lost his element and admitted to participating in the hazing of junior cadets, and had been allowed on the basis of his honesty and his conduct in the marsh to repeat the course after remedial training. He looked at them for a moment. He had clearly thought about what he was going to say. He had clearly thought about it for weeks. And what he had decided Avery understood the moment he opened his mouth was to give them the unglamorous version rather than the one that would make him look better. My name is Tate Hollowayton, he said. Some of you heard about me in the week 1 brief. The version in the brief is accurate. I want to fill in some of what's between the lines. He paused. I participated in something that hurt people because I wanted to belong to the strongest thing in the room. I told myself it was training. I told myself it was honest. I knew it wasn't either of those things, and I kept doing it anyway. He looked at the formation. I changed a route without authorization during an exercise because I was more afraid of looking insufficient than I was careful about keeping people safe. A cadet got injured because of that decision. The injury could have been significantly worse. He stopped. Both of those things are on my record. Both of them should be. The parade ground was very quiet. The reason I'm standing here instead of being gone entirely, he said, is because when someone asked me directly whether I'd done something wrong, I said yes. And because in the marsh, after I'd already created the problem, I kept my team moving instead of falling apart. He looked at them steadily. Those things mattered. They didn't erase what I did. They gave me a chance to try to do something different with it. He paused once more. That's what I'm doing right now. I'm telling you what I did, and why not because it makes me look good, but because you need to know the actual shape of how this goes wrong. Not in theory, in practice, in a person, in me. He stepped back. Nobody clapped. That wasn't the right response, and somehow everyone in that formation understood it. What they gave him instead was something more valuable. Attention, real attention, the kind of listening that changes something in the person doing it. Avery watched from the edge of the ground and felt something she had not expected to feel in this context, something that had nothing to do with professional assessment or institutional outcome. She felt proud of him, not because he had become someone different, because he was trying to become someone better, and he was doing it in public at personal cost with no guarantee of how it would be received. That was the hardest version. That was the one that actually counted. After the ceremony, she found him near the side exit. He was standing alone, which felt like a choice, giving himself a moment before re-entering the current of things. He saw her coming and straightened slightly. Not defensively, just the instinct toward attention in the presence of a senior officer that gets baked in early and stays. Callahan, he said. Holloway, she said. She stopped in front of him. She looked at him directly. That was the right thing. He looked at her. It didn't feel like enough. It never does, she said. That's not a problem. That's the appropriate feeling for what you did. She paused. But it was the right thing. Those cadets are going to remember what you said longer than they'll remember anything in the week 1 brief, because it came from a person standing in front of them, taking responsibility in real time, not from a document. She held his gaze. What you did today is going to matter to someone in that formation, in a moment we'll never know about. When they're facing a choice that looks small but isn't, they'll remember a guy who stood up and said, I did this and it was wrong, and here's what it actually looked like. That matters. I was quiet. He was looking at her with the expression of someone who is trying to determine whether they deserve to let a true thing land, and deciding slowly, carefully that maybe they can allow it just slightly. Remedial training starts Monday, he said. I know, she said. Are you ready? No, he said. Honest? But I'm going. She nodded. That's the same thing, she said. At this stage, he almost smiled. Not quite, but the territory of it was there. Can I ask you something, he said. Yes. In the marsh, he said, when you came back for me, when you were holding my head up. He paused. Were you angry at that point? Were you angry at me? She thought about it. She gave it the honest consideration it deserved rather than the quick, reassuring answer. A little, she said. Not at you specifically, at the situation, at the fact that we were in it. She looked at him steadily. But anger doesn't change what needs to happen. You were in the water. I had the capacity to help. Everything else was secondary. He absorbed that. He nodded slowly. I think that's what I'm trying to learn, he said. To make the thing that needs to happen more important than the thing I'm feeling. He paused. It's harder than it sounds. Yes, she said, it is. She extended her hand. He shook it. The handshake lasted the right amount of time. She turned and walked back toward the main parade ground because there was one more thing to do before she left Camp Hawthorne. Logan was at the edge of the ceremony. He had come, which surprised some people and would have surprised her 3 months ago. He was in service uniform, not dress, standing in a position that was clearly chosen to be visible, but not intrusive, the specific geography of someone who wants to be seen making an appropriate choice, but understands that their presence requires justification rather than assumption. She walked to him. He saw her coming and went very still, in the way that people do when they are uncertain what a moment is going to require of them. She stopped in front of him. She looked at him. He looked back at her. He was not the same person who had crossed his forearm across her throat in a gymnasium and whispered, "Say it." He was not reformed. He was not resolved. He was somewhere in the long, uncomfortable middle of a process that had no clean ending, and the awareness of that was visible in his face in a way that would not have been possible 3 months ago. "You came," she said. "I wanted to see it," he said. His voice was quieter than she remembered it. Not smaller. Quieter. There is a difference. "See what it looks like when it works, right?" She nodded. He looked at the parade ground, at the cadets talking, the instructors moving through them, the specific texture of a ceremony that had meant something rather than just marked time. He looked at it for a long moment. "I owe you an apology," he said. He said it to the parade ground, and then he looked at her. "Not a general one, a specific one." He paused. "In the dining hall, in the equipment bay, in the gymnasium, everything I did was designed to make you feel like you didn't belong here." He held her gaze. "You belonged here more than I did. I knew it by week 2 and I kept going anyway. I'm sorry." She looked at him. She let the apology land. She gave it the respect of taking time to receive it rather than deflecting it with something gracious and quick. "I hear you," she said. "Not I forgive you, not it's okay, not we're good." Because none of those things were the right thing. The right thing was a "hear you," which acknowledged the apology without performing a resolution that hadn't been earned yet. He nodded. He understood the difference. She could see that he did, and the fact that he understood it told her something important. "The program," she said, "the accountability work. How is it?" He looked at the ground for a moment. "Hard," he said. "The therapist they assign, she doesn't let me. She doesn't accept the easy version. She keeps pushing on the why." He looked up. "I keep finding things I don't like." "That's the work," she said. "Yeah," he said. "I'm starting to understand that." The same words Portillo had used. The same recognition from a completely different place arrived at through completely different pain. She found something in the symmetry that was not comforting exactly, but was real. "One honest decision," she said. "That's where a different life starts." He looked at her. "Is that enough?" "It's enough to start," she said. "Then you make another one and another, and eventually the decisions add up to something." He was quiet, then quietly, "What if they don't? What if I make all the decisions and it still doesn't add up to enough?" She looked at him for a long moment. "Then you made the right decisions," she said. "That still matters. Even if the outcome isn't what you wanted, the decisions are still yours." He had no answer to that. He didn't need one. She left him standing at the edge of the parade ground and walked to where Commander Sloan was waiting, and the two of them walked together to the small stage at the front of the remaining assembly where the graduates of the rebuilt Class 207 were settling in for the final address. Avery stood in front of them. She did not use notes. She did not need them. She looked at the faces in front of her, Noah with his leadership award, and his clear eyes, Kim, with her precise attention. Portillo with his newly learned willingness to be uncomfortable in public. The dozen others who had chosen better than they had been choosing and understood that the choice had cost them something and had made it anyway. She spoke to them the way she always spoke when she chose to speak directly without decoration, with the specific weight of someone who means every word because they have paid for every word with experience. "You are leaving this course knowing something that most people who walk through a training program never learn," she said. "You know the shape of how things go wrong from the inside. You watched it happen. Some of you participated in it. Some of you were silent. Some of you were both at different points." She looked across them. "That knowledge is not comfortable. It's not supposed to be. It's supposed to be useful." She paused. "Elite training does not make you a weapon," she said. "The world has plenty of weapons. What the world needs, what the people who will depend on you need, and are operators who understand when force is necessary, and more importantly, when it is not. It's not. Leaders who listen before they give orders. Teams that protect their quietest member instead of measuring how much that person can endure." She let that sit for a moment. "A real warrior releases the moment a teammate taps," she said. "Not because the rules say to, Because the person tapping is a human being who trusted you with their safety, and that trust is the only thing that makes any of this worth doing. She looked at Noah. He was looking back at her. His expression was the same one she had seen in the hallway when he had almost said something to her and hadn't yet found the words, except that now he had found them and the finding was visible in his face. Take care of each other, she said. Not when it's easy, when it costs you something. That's the only version that counts. She stepped back. The applause started with Noah. That felt right. It spread fast, and it was genuine, the kind that comes from people who have been through something real together and are applauding the fact of having come through it rather than performing appreciation. And Avery stood at the front and received it without deflecting it or performing humility, because neither deflection nor performance was honest. And honesty was the only standard she had ever been able to hold herself to without feeling like a fraud. She was Chief Petty Officer Avery Callahan, Naval Special Warfare Command, 31 years old and deployed again in 72 hours, and she had arrived at Camp Hawthorne as the wrong new girl, and she was leaving as what she had always been, the person who stays. The person who, when the water rises and the platform falls, and the easier choice is to let someone else's bad decisions become their own problem, goes back into the marsh anyway, and puts her arm under someone's back and says, I've got you, and means it not as a kindness, not as a performance, not as a favor to someone who has earned it, but as a fact, because that was who she was. And nobody, Logan Mercer with his choke grip and his borrowed authority, not a flooding marsh, not a storm from the Bahamas, not 3 weeks of sabotage and rumors and the grinding weight of a culture that had decided she did not belong. Nobody had ever come close to changing that. The quietest person in Class 207 had been the most dangerous one all along, not because of what she could do to people who threatened her, because of what she refused to stop doing for the ones who needed her. That was the difference. That had always been the difference. And now finally, Class